Arfat, thank you, Arfat, coming out of the World Trade Center. My name is George Iwan Marantika. I'm the National President of the Indonesian Australian Business Council, and I'm coming from the heritage city of Yogyakarta to be with you here today. As Arfat, our Executive Director, has shared with you all, we have a very distinguished panel today that will basically convene in this roundtable, this IABC roundtable, on a very important topic in which, as most of you know, this month is what we call in IABC the IA-CEPA month, because on the 5th of July of last year, exactly 1 year ago, IA-CEPA was ratified, or the Indonesian-Australian Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement was ratified or entered into force in the two countries in Australia and Indonesia. So it has become law. And therefore, it is exciting the business community or motivating the business community to see what we can do together between Australia and Indonesia, people to people, the business to business, government to government, private sector to private sector, and the including universities to universities and education sector to education sector. Very, very exciting. But obviously, in context, as you all know, of March last year, we have all been hit by the COVID pandemic. And obviously, now I think everyone was hoping in January or February that we would have new momentum because of the vaccines and whatnot. But obviously, it's quite clear that as of July, we are facing, the whole world is probably facing either the second or third wave and of new variants such as Delta. So you see all these dynamics coming into play. And that thus becomes the theme of today, and which is the Indonesian-Australian Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or IA-CEPA, in the midst of the global COVID pandemic. So in the tradition of Shakespeare, woe is me, IA-CEPA, to be or not to be? That is the question of the dialogue today. And with us, for providing opening remarks, we have a very distinguished diplomat who is the head of Policy Analysis and Development Agency of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. And obviously, because this is already public information, he is also nominated by the Indonesian president to be the nominee for the ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia in Canberra. And so we are very honored that we have with us today Dr. Siswo Pramono, whom I can quite confidently say is an Australian alumni, because he finished his Ph.D. in ANU and master's degree in Monash University, and also got his bachelor's from ANU also. So I would say a full-blown Australian alumni who studied in Australia and knows a lot about Australia. But we are honored to have with us today Dr. Siswo Pramono to give and share his thoughts on how he sees the greatest or one of the best bilateral agreements, I think, in Indonesia, if not one of the most strategic bilateral agreements within the region, the IA-CEPA, how he sees or his thoughts on the future of IA-CEPA, especially in the midst of this global pandemic. So with that, without further ado, Dr. Siswo Pramono from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, may I give the floor to you, sir. Please, Pak Siswo.
Thank you, Pak George, and also Pak Kiki Verico and distinguished panel. Thanks for inviting me in this very important virtual roundtable. This is Talk Among Friends, and talking among friends must be very open, yeah, and also honest. I try to be as honest and as open as possible. My task in the next 15 minutes is to share with you my personal opinion about Indonesian-Australian strategic ties in the midst of global pandemics, Indonesian, Australia, and CEPA, and also very important geopolitical shift into Asia and Indo-Pacific. In the last 100 years, the power structure of the world has not significantly changed. It has always been based on constellation of contending major powers, even though a concept of middle powers like Indonesia, Australia, Mexico, and Turkey, Mikta, is also to some extent able to influence international agenda. The world, hello? The world would never escape the contending hegemonic powers. In the past, we saw the US-Soviet Soviet Union rivalry, and now the US-China rivalry. The notion of superpower does still exist, even though with more and more limitations in their capacity to influence outcomes. The descending US is the old superpower. However, the US still maintains strategic supremacy in both political and military powers. China is the ascending economic superpower, albeit is still far away from reaching the top of global politics. But we are also understand from the same world power structure that I mentioned before, still we can nurture cooperation and partnership, otherwise the global community would have collapsed since long time ago. There is also the drive now toward pluralism, multilateralism, and cooperation, even though the spirit has been recently diminished. The other strategic development is on the players or actors of global politics. States and governments remain important actors in global politics, but the number of non-state actors increase, in particular the role of corporates. Never before in the fate of the world is so depending on pharmaceutical industry like today due to COVID-19 pandemics. A dependence that is being complicated by the power of power politics. So we are experiencing the contention now between the notion of equal access to vaccine for everyone and the notion of vaccine nationalism, for instance. We understand that everyone got difficulty to obtain a vaccine. Out of the world top 100 revenue collectors, only about 30% are states, 70% are corporates, out of which almost half of them are from Asia. Sometimes the interest of the state colluded with the interest of big corporates, for instance, in the process of democracy, governance, and foreign policy, but most of the time they don't. States are engaged in rivalry to the point of war if necessary. Corporate are engaged in competition, but they need peace and stability for their operation, not wars, not instability. So we are talking here about the role of business community in maintaining strategic peace. And this can only happen if business is able to promote political trust and economic interdependence among states. And the Australia-Indonesia-CEPA is one of the evidence of that. Against the backdrop of this traditional power structure of the world, I would like to draw a perspective in Indonesian-Australian context. So the US-China rivalry is not fading away, but is getting worse in the years to come. Trade war will likely be also complicated by technological war. The current practice of blacklisting business persons or companies of the rivaling countries will continue in the near future as well. Indonesia respects Australia's positioning in this global rivalry. Australia is part of the Quad, US, Australia, Japan, and Indian Forum, which has been interpreted by many, unfortunately, as an attempt to contain China. But Australia also respects Indonesia's positioning in this global rivalry as well. And I would like to make clear what is Indonesia's positioning in this matter. For centuries, Indonesia was the colony of the West. Indonesia gained her independence in 1945 through Revolutionary War, and Australia supported our independence, helped us in our independence. That is why we are anti-colonization, occupation. We fought the Dutch, the British, and the Japanese at the time. Indonesia led and hosted Afro-Asian Decolonization Conference in Bandung in 1955. Indonesia has always been anti-domination and anti-hegemony. That is why we refused to be dominated by the Eastern Bloc or Western Bloc during the Cold War and pursued our own non-alignment policy. This positioning remains true until today in the context of the current US-China rivalry. This attitude is reflected in our long-standing notion of independent and active foreign policy, non-alignment. As such, Indonesia policy on ASEAN too is to promote zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, of which neutrality in this very context is by nature non-alignment. So peace for longer times in the region, and this is good for business. Last but not least, Indonesia has been pursuing economic development. Economic development is very important. It's a very basic foundation of our national resilience. To develop our economy, we need reliable partners, which are advanced economy for trade, investment, and transfer of technology. This means both the US and China for Indonesia are strategic partners. Therefore, Indonesia will not take sides in the US-China rivalry, but it will even enhance more economic partnerships with the US and China, despite of the strategic rivalry between the two. Meanwhile, geopolitical shift into Asia is real. In particular, this is true for East Asia and Oceania. On the rise of Asia, Indonesia's positioning is straightforward. One, East Asia and Oceania have become the main pillar of the world economy, which is much bigger than economic pillars of North America, NAFTA, or the European Union. Two, as of 2020, 45% of the total GDP purchasing power parity in the G20 came from Asia. By 2030, 10 years from now, more than 51% will come from East and South Asia. So this will be the rising role of Asia in the global economy. Three, RCEP will become the largest trading bloc in the world with a relatively high level of regional economic integration. Four, demographic bonus will be concentrated still in Indonesia until 2030 or perhaps beyond that, and then India until 2045 or 2050s. While China is starting to show signs of an aging community, but Indian and Indonesian economies will still be supported by unhealthy, productive demographic postures in the decades to come. Five, despite various limitations, a robust ASEAN political architecture with the help of our developed partners, including Australia, will be able to promote regional stability. In fact, major interstate wars have been absent in our region over the last 50 years. Business in Asia flourishes because this very long-term peace and stability. But there are implications that need to be anticipated. There is an anxiety in the Western world toward the geopolitical shift into Asia because such a geopolitical shift is wrongly associated with only the perceived rise of China, not the rise of Asia as a whole. The question in the West is this: how far the geopolitical shift into Asia will eventually be prejudicial to the liberal order, which was originally founded on the Washington Consensus in the 80s. How far the possibility that the current order is being replaced by the so-called market economy with China characteristic. You can follow this from media, from research, from journal. There are a lot of calls and also attention on the issue I mentioned before. It is this uncertainty that spawned in the last 2 years various Indo-Pacific policy by the Netherlands, France, Germany, the EU, and perhaps also UK and Canada, following the similar policy promoted 5 or 4 years ago by Japan, the US, Australia, and India. Even ASEAN, now we also have our own positioning on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Biden's effort to restore U.S. leadership among the major power democracies, as seen from the process in the recently held G7, are to mainstream containments against China as common interest in the West. But Europe, as we know it, are hardly united on China issues. So ladies and gentlemen, finally for us in Indonesia, an ASEAN perspective needs to be fairly considered as well. The rise of Asia, so to speak, was pioneered long time ago with the rise of ASEAN tigers in the 1980s. The then newly industrialized economy of Singapore, Hong Kong, Chinese Taipei, and South Korea were in fact the ultimate beneficiaries of this very liberal order. Transformation of Indonesia through a long political reform in 1998 to become democracy, as we know it today, is also an important factor in the region. In RCEP, China's economy is about 45%, whereas about 55% is the economy of Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, all of which are democratic economies, and ASEAN as well. If India, a non-RCEP economy, is also counted in the equation, then the proportion of the democratic economy in Asia will be even bigger vis-a-vis the communist China. But please remember this, in Asia, common interests override ideology. In Asia, common interest, not ideology, has always been the basis of cooperation, the inclusive cooperation. ASEAN, China, FTA, and RCEP itself are the proof of such pragmatism. Equally important for Asia, beyond RCEP, partnership with North America and Western Europe for trade and investment is strategically important and necessity. As such, this is the development of the strategic environment which provide the challenge and opportunity for Indonesia-Australian ties. Geopolitical complexity notwithstanding, the two nations already invested common interest in strategic political economic projects. The implementation of Plan of Action of Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership 2020-2024 is very, very important on the implementation. The implementation of Indonesia-Australia CEPA, our topic of discussion today, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, is also very, very important, not only for Australia, Indonesia, but also for the immediate region as well. Such strategic projects are implemented against the very fluid, dynamic, and fragile situation that I have mentioned before. The US-China rivalry and possible power projection to Asia and Oceania will continue. Indonesia and Australia perhaps have taken different positioning, but the two nations are committed to maintain peace and stability in Asia and Oceania. And this is a very strong point. And peace and stability is good for economics and business development. The global pandemic is far from over. The world is preparing even to live with COVID-19 in the next 4 or 5 years, with all the consequences of third wave, fourth wave, and so on. But the world, and this is particularly true again for Asia and Oceania, is now stepping in the early stage of economic recovery. You can see from the statistics. We must seize this opportunity, Indonesia and Australia. The task of business community is now even more complex to help promote political trust, economic interdependence, in which business become a tool or the tool to promote peace, stability, and welfare. As Indonesia is implementing the Omnibus Law to improve our ease of doing business, the implementation of Indonesia-Australia CEPA should be able to strengthen the comprehensive strategic ties between the two nations, to improve both Indonesia and Australia contribution to the global value chains, in particular the notion of economic powerhouse working together to penetrate the third market in ASEAN and beyond. For us to improve performance of our export is also equally important, in particular automotive, wood product, furniture, textile, rubber product, communication tool, machineries, pharmaceutical product, food and beverage, and electronic. the increasing total trade, the larger economic pie, has always been good for both sides. To improve foreign direct investment from Australia is desirable, in particular in the sector of infrastructure, clean and renewable energy, including research and development on rare earths and strategic mineral, tourism, and e-commerce. Owing to the fact that Australia is an advanced economy, cooperation on higher education, as Pak George already mentioned, and vocational training should be the priority. Last but not least, building strategic trust, a strategic trust that leads to strategic partnership and the development of research, science, and technology is strategically important. The two nations should work together on green and sustainable development agenda. That is the things that we are pursuing in the years to come, of which the role of science and technology is essential. The distinguished panel, Pak George, Pak Kiki Verico, I had better stop in here. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Siswo, for sharing your thoughts, and I think in ending your thoughts on the strategic relationship, as in our previous conversations of how Indonesia and Australia can expand that, on areas such as rare earth and whatnot, and science, and how that can be developed into a strategic initiative, between the two countries. Is very, very strategic, I believe, Siswo. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. And we have a distinguished panel, but Siswo, but we also have a distinguished audiences here that are with us today. As I noticed from our friends from the business community of Australia, from AIBC, I've noticed David from Queensland, Peter Craven from Tasmania, Jeff Parker, and even I see Brian Clark here from ACCI, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, and a good friend, the past president of AIBC, Deb Noth, is here with us today also. So thank you all, and thank you, Pak Siswo. Obviously, we're going to have a conversation. You're free to continue to join, and you know, obviously chime in if you see any thoughts that you would like to share with us as we begin this conversation in this roundtable. So thank you again, Pak Siswo, and we wish you the best of luck on the continuous process that you're going through right now. Thank you, Pak Siswo. Terima kasih, Dr. Siswo Pramono. Thank you, sir. And so now we have with us also the keynote speaker who will share with us his thoughts on IA-CEPA and actually his research. So this is actually very interesting because obviously that research will identify the strategic interest between Indonesia and Australia and what can be done. We have with us Dr. Kiki Verico. He is the Vice Director of Research in the University of Indonesia, the School of Economics of the University of Indonesia. But he's also the advisor to the Indonesian Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani. So, Pak Kiki, coming from Canberra, the floor is yours. Dr. Kiki Verico.
Thank you very much, Pak George, for your kind introductions. Thank you, Pak Siswo, for giving us broad perspectives from political side, international relations, and economic political. Very important insight. And I will focus, as Pak George mentioned, on my research on the economic aspect of Indonesia-Australia bilateral economic relations, in particular CEPA components of trade and investments. So in order to make it easier to follow, please allow me to share my slides. So and as Pak Noke always remind me to not too academic, so I will try to put this as practical as possible as I can afford. So the title is Bilateral Economic Relations, of course, and then I have a paper, a working paper actually, on the how to measure bilateral economic relations. So it's about the measurement, but I try to make it practical. And at the beginning, the organizer asked me to present these measurements approach of the bilateral economic relations between Indonesia and Australia. But given in these worrisome situations, surging numbers of infections in Indonesia, the organizer asked me to take more on the perspective of the global pandemic and the effect to Indonesia economy before I go into my research presentations. So I will accommodate that, and then luckily I have a paper earlier before I published these measurements of the economic relation between Indonesia and Australia. That's entitled Global Pandemic 2020 and then the impact to the Indonesia economy. So please allow me to combine these two, and hopefully it could be I could answer the request from the AIBC. And thank you very much again, AIBC, for having me. So let me start with the content. I will explain about deliver and share with all distinguished participants here about the Indonesia economy from the global pandemic situation at the moment, and then production network. The number two is a production network is actually beyond my research. And this is an in progress working paper that I'm working on. But this useful. I'm finished with the calculation, and I will take this as an opportunity to explain Australia position from the Indonesia perspectives in terms of export and several indicators that I use to construct the production network index. And then from number 3 to number 7, that's the number 6 actually. That's the actual that what I would like to present at the beginning for this occasion. And then number 7 to confirm the long run with the index that also I tried to construct. So without further ado, let me focus. Let me start with this first slide. So the idea is I have a 150-year period of data, export plus import per GDP. So from this data, I try to look at what factors that affect the world economy from these 150 years. And then I found from 1870 to 2018 global data, I found that the amplitude, the highest gap between the top and the low point is around this area. So the left-hand side, if you can see the left-hand side, so around 1920s. And I need something to prove which year in accurate that happened for this break. So I used this Dickey-Fuller chart, and then I found that you can see on the top right-hand side, 1919. Then to prove it even more, I try to look at which period, how long. So I found in the right-hand side down, you can see that every scale is 15 years. So 00 starting from 1870. So every scale is 15 years. So it is around starting from 1915 or 1914 to 1945. That's the biggest period of pressure in the world economy. So what I would like to show you that it starts from 1919. So it starts from this, let me use annotate. It starts with, here, it starts with this period, and then until this period around 1945. So the world experienced high pressure in global economy and global trade from around 1919 or 1998 to 1918, 1918 to 1945, around that. And it started, the break is 1919. So even at that time, there were World War I and World War II, the global pandemic, Spanish flu, 1918, 1919, and 1920 give pressure even more to the world economy, to the globalization. So that's what I would like to share with you, that pandemic is something serious and it can influence pressure to the economy. And of course, the world witnessed the Great Depression 1930s, and then following after that 1940 until 1945, and after that the world pick up, the global economy pick up. So that's we are witnessing again 100 years after that, since 2019. So exactly 100 years after the first break in 1919 for the world economy. We enter the sub-zero economic growth. The world entered the negative economic growth across the country around the world. And that's happened to also affect Indonesia and Australia. So let me focus on Indonesia. So if you look at Indonesia data, Indonesia experienced negative economic growth in the last 50 years. For instance, it's back then in 1998. So back then the ASEAN financial crisis, 1998. And that at that time, economic growth, as you can see on the top right here, is negative until on average is quarterly, so negative 13% in 1998. And then the inflation rate is skyrocketing, is you can see quarterly, and then at that time on average about 75% inflation rate. So if you compare this to the pressure that Indonesia experienced and also around the world experienced, is totally different, because the economic growth wasn't not that huge pressure. So Indonesia 2020 record -2, and then the inflation rate is very low, is 1.68%. So why this is so happen? Because in 1998, the crisis is from monetary for financial sector, but now is from real sector, from the aggregate demand. It's not about productivity, but about the pressure from the demand side, because a demand problem, human health, and so on. So these two difference of the crisis, and also you later on after this, which sector that influence Indonesia economic recovery when we can manage, or when the number increase, number of infections increase. So I can understand that at the moment we are focused on like what Ken said, focus on the fiscal policy to help those who really need the most help from the government. So we are talking about fiscal expansionary, counter-cyclical, more expansionary monetary, which is actually is hard to do, because it's kind of like a liquidity trap for the country. Even the lower or the lowest interest rate cannot help the economy, because the problem is in the public health and the human health. And but when we are talking about economic cooperation, bilateral economic cooperations like Indonesia, Australia, CEPA, that's actually talking about medium to long run. So sometimes it seems doesn't match. It's talking this cooperation during the pandemic situation. But this topic, economic cooperation, CEPA, and so on, is a long-lasting topic. So whenever we're ready, whenever the global economy ready into the new normal, whenever we can manage, we're living with the endemic, no longer pandemic, endemic with the COVID-19, and then we need to talk about again trade and investment. So better we talk this like every day. Because once we enter the new normal, we start with the very fast or very quick pace. So, okay, and this is just to show you, to compare in Indonesia, whenever we can manage, and at the time the numbers surging of the COVID. So this is two sector you can see. If the number increase, the number of infection increase, and we are focusing on the health and contain the pandemic, then the driver sector in Indonesia is ICT, and then health. Water, because people living at home, and agriculture is the most resilient and most agility sector in Indonesia. But you can see that trade, transportation, accommodation is part of the decrease. Decrease means the trend is increased, even the its economic growth is negative. So this helps by platforms. Trade helps by the e-commerce, transportation helps by the ride hailing, accommodation, food and beverage, because of the ride hailing, we can order the food from home. But when the pandemic can manage, we can go into the next. So you can see that ICT and health are no longer the driver of economic growth. The driver of economic growth, agriculture remains strong, and then you can see that manufacture, constructions, those are essential sectors, and trade firm service increase. So it's still below negative from the Q1 2021, but it showed that whenever Indonesia can manage or contain the pandemic, manufacture, trade, constructions increase the trend. So that means that whenever we can manage or contain the pandemic, we can start to boost the economic production network. So then let me show you, this is my, don't worry about these constructions. The thing that I would like to share to you that this is the proportions of Australia, 1.5 or 1.6% to total Indonesia export to the world. Australia is part of top 12 Indonesia major exporting destination countries. And if I calculate through 15 index that I have, Australia 0.21. If I classify those in Australia and Indonesia still at the lower middle gravity economic relations. So that means Indonesia, Australia needs more effort to increase cooperations, and Indonesia, Australia, CEPA is one of the best example to increase these two country relations, because different to other countries like with China, Indonesia is high, with the US is high. I mean, without bilateral economic cooperations, Indonesia with China and USA by nature, they have a strong economic relations. So that's the reasons why IA-CEPA is very important. So let me, that's my presentation on global pandemic, Indonesia economy, and why IA-CEPA is very important. Now I would like to share, this is the thing that actually IABC organizer asked me to present. So basically, this is not the first time I wrote an article or paper on Indonesia-Australia economic relation in terms of CEPA. About 6 years ago, with Professor Budi Sudarmo from the ANU and Doni Pasaribu, my colleagues at the ANU, he graduated from the ANU, I mean, we make a chapter of book that published, edited by Misbah and Perde, and then that's about the first time I attempt to make an analysis between the two countries. And also I thank to Pak Noke. This is not the first time actually I engaged with the Indonesia-Australia Business Council. 5 years ago, I was asked to make an paper from the economic perspective on Indonesia, Australia, with the title Breaking Barriers, Building Bonds, published 2016. So and now in 2020, just last year, I published another. This is by my own, and I have another perspective to introduce to analyze between the two countries' economic relation. So this table just to amplify what Dr. Siswo mentioned before, that Indonesia is a developing countries, Australia is developed countries. As we can see here from other sectors analysis, that's clear that Australia is have a high value added in the economy, but Indonesia have a size, big size in economy, big size in populations, and also a big size in some sectors proportion. Okay. Sorry. Okay, let me focus on the topic of the CEPA is actually for trade and investment. My research is actually try to see the trade and investment relation between these two countries. That's the idea, and then I use the RCA and CMSA. I won't explain this into details because it's too technicals. But the thing is, I use RCA. Is the comparison of proportions of economic sectors, two countries to the world. The CMSA actually comparison of the growth. So with this calculation, I try to classify which sector that have high proportions and also growing. So high proportion compared to the world economy. And then I use another method which is globally accepted by the scholar academician called the GTEP. With the GTEP model, we can clarify my calculation. And then last but not least, with that production network index analysis, I try to conclude the presentations on how Indonesia, Australia connected in terms of economics. Okay, so this is basically the idea of my research. I classify Indonesia, Australia based on HS 4-digit harmonized system 4-digit for export and import product. I mean export from Indonesia, export from Australia. And I classify into these 4 categories. So the first category is great. Great, it means that if the proportion is high and then it's growing. And sunset is a proportion is high but declining. And sunrise is the other way around. The proportion or the share is low but growing. So this is potential product. And the poor is a product that the proportion is low and also is declining. So I try to find the connection between these two, and I found that if the product is similar, more the cooperation on trade-based cooperations. But while if the sunrise to sunset, that the other way around. So in this research, I found that if sunrise to sunset, that means country can invest in that So from sunrise country to the sunset country, the investment flows. So this research tried to prove that not only Australia the potential to invest in Indonesia, but also Indonesia the other way around have potential to invest in Australia. The question is which product? And then with this classification, I try to identify the products. So I identify actually 1,232 products HS4, and I classify for both country, Indonesia, Australia, into this quadrant. And then for this quadrant, I focus on what I suspect for the investment relation between sunrise to sunset. So you can see that from the side Indonesia to Australia, there are 17 products that Indonesia have potential to invest in Australia. And Australia, as developed countries, of course, we can expect that Australia have more option to invest in Indonesia, which 45 product is double, almost three times of more than 3 times of Indonesia potential investment to Australia. Okay, and then from this, this is my finding. So from Indonesia's side, Indonesia sunrise, Australia sunset, this is the potential that Indonesia can invest in Australia from my calculation. So most of product here are products that related to the food, so food related products. So to some extent, it confirms the wisdom of the crowd that I read from the many newspaper, social media. Experts suggest that during the negotiation of Indonesia-Australia CEPA suggests that Indonesia have potential to invest into the food-related products in Australia. So to some extent, it confirms the wisdom of the crowd. And then what products that Australia can invest in Indonesia with the similar calculation and then the similar classification from sunrise to sunset, I found these products. So before 54 product, and then I try to filtering that into product that really Indonesia have competitiveness in on it, and then I use terms of trade and net export to classify elegance product. Elegance product means that Indonesia terms of trade is higher, is more than 1, and that the surplus. So high price, what surplus? So like red carpet for Australia. So which product that potential to be the destination of investment and the product, and then have competitiveness, strong competitiveness for Indonesia is, you can see here related this to the labor intensive product and to clothing, footwear, and textile. and some product related to the furniture, and other product related to the office equipment. So there are the products that I suspect have a big potential for Australia to invest in Indonesia. And this is a GTAP. I skip it. And then this is the GTAP model that I used to confirm my calculation. What the difference between this model and the previous model? This model cannot analyze into too details, because it classify the food is just like grain crops, extractions, meat, food, processed food, different to the previous that I can identify into details product. But the advantage of this model is it can see the non-tradable products, which are the products that not part of the HS4, but it's part of the economy, like service sector, because HS4 doesn't cover the service sector product. And then you can see here, it confirms the calculations, the previous calculations. Negative means ready to receive investment. Then you can see that negative here from Australia is grain crops, meat, and then processed food. So this model confirmed that the product that Indonesia potential to invest in Australia are food-related products. And then for Indonesia, it also confirms the result that Indonesia good to receive investment from Australia in WAP, this is textile, footwear, and apparel clothing. So it confirms again. And then another thing that you can use from this is this calculation can show that service sector from utilities, transport, communication, other services, maybe like aged care, healthcare, higher education, vocational education, and so on, are the potential that Indonesia can receive investment from Australia. So that's from trade. And then for short and medium run, to the long run, I found that cooperation between Australia and Indonesia can increase the productivity. So negative here, meaning that the decreasing or declining of the price, because price is in inverse of the productivity. Price is equal to wages per marginal productivity of labor. So it showed the increasing productivity. So increasing productivity of Australia from all sectors, the cooperation between Indonesia and Australia. And let me finish with this slide. So from as I mentioned, I start with the index that I construct from 15 macroeconomic indicators. From these indicators, I can calculate, and I can transform that calculation into the variable export, import, or FDI inflows or outflows. And then from this calculation, I found between Indonesia and Australia have a potential from export, from Indonesia side, export and FDI inflows. This is from Indonesia side. So I call it a production network from. That means Indonesia is potential to receive investment from Australia in which sector, as I mentioned, like clothing, footwear, others Indonesia sectors that Indonesia have competitiveness on them. And then using Indonesia as a base of production to export to the rest of the world. So production network between Indonesia and Australia has been identified from this calculation. And I remember some time ago, one of professor at the ANU mentioned that the economic relation between Indonesia and Australia is beneficial for Australia to be a part of a production network, not only for Australia and Indonesia, but I want to amplify what Pak Siswo, echoing Pak Siswo saying, is not only for Indonesia, Australia, but also for the region and also for the rest of the world. So let me finish with this. Those who can run faster should run faster. If you want to run faster, run alone. If you want to run further, run together. How to run faster but further? That's from the we expect from Indonesia, Australia, CEPA. Thank you very much. I stop here and then return to Pak George.
Thank you, Dr. Kiki Verico. Very extensive research that you have published and researched, and I think your insights are very useful for our audience today. And again, I just would like to welcome, obviously, Pak Kiki is from the University of Indonesia. We also have university leaders here. From University Gadjah Mada, I noticed Dr. Andre Maylala. Also from Western Sydney Uni, Mr. Ian Sebastian Mariza Furno. And also distinguished audience also from Australia, from our consulates, from Consul General of Melbourne, ITPC and IABC in Australia also. And also we have distinguished audiences here from Catalyst, you know, the newly launched Catalyst, yeah, which we'll have a conversation with in the future. Pak Bernie and Ibu Clarice Campbell. So thank you all for joining. And again, thank you, Pak Kiki, for those insights as we move now into a conversation. Because both from Dr. Siswo Pramono and from Dr. Kiki Verico, we have insights from government perspective, from academic perspective. And so we will have also now a conversation with the panel. And the panel is also the distinguished board members of IABC, whom previously Pa Arfat shared with us the composition of our panel. So without further ado, I would like to now move into a conversation with the panel to respond, to comment, or to give insight on what Dr. Siswo Pramono has shared and what Dr. Kiki Verico have shared, but also what you think in the context now, again, IA-CEPA in the midst of the global COVID pandemic. And so if you all would kindly agree, we'll do ladies first, and we will ask the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner of Austrade in Indonesia, whom is also on the board of advisors of IABC, Ms. Sally Dean, to begin to share your thoughts on what Dr. Siswo Pramono has shared and what Dr. Kiki Verico has shared, and how you see it in the current context from your perspective. Please, Ibu Sally Dean, I believe coming in from the Australian Embassy in Jakarta. Please, Ibu.
Thanks, George. Yes, that's correct. I'm sitting in the Australian Embassy here in Jakarta, and thank you to IABC for hosting this event, and to Pak Siswo and Pak Kiki for their comments so far and their very interesting presentation. I think all of us on this call, all of us are keen to see our trade and economic relationship with Indonesia, Australia's economic relationship, develop further and to build our economic ties. And I noted that Dr. Kiki talked about Australia being a in the top 12 trading partner. We certainly want to increase that. So I'm sure all on this call shares that ambition. I guess my reflections are that when IA-CEPA entered into force in July last year, it was in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and both of our economies had closed borders and we were experiencing lockdowns. And for us, we had been progressing in the lead up to that. We'd been progressing plans to promote the agreement through a range of activities. We had things planned like a ministerial-led business mission. We had visits planned to bring Australian exporters, investors to the market. But of course, none of that was possible. And with businesses closed, and with borders closed, businesses on both sides have been unable to visit our respective markets and to build those relationships that we all know are so important for doing business and deepening our engagement. But despite those challenges, I'm pleased to say that we are still seeing some positive movement on the commercial front. The health sector, it's no surprise, is one sector where we've been seeing some positive engagement and some great partnerships emerge. For example, we've seen Australian cloud-based digital health company Z Technologies find partners in Indonesia to help doctors and patients share X-rays easily through digital means. We've seen the leading Indonesian telehealth startup Halodoc announced in April this year that they'd obtained some Series C funding, and one of those investors was an Australian early stage investment, Hill Partners. And all of you probably would have seen the announcement late last year of the tie-up between Australian companies Asper Medical and Doctor with the West Java government to build and operate healthcare clinics and hospitals across West Java. But we've seen the pandemic accelerate interest from businesses and consumers in other sectors. A really simple example, I guess, is that we've seen an increasing interest in health and vitamins and health supplements. And the Australian brand Blackmores is now even more prominent on supermarket and pharmacy shelves, and that's been through their tie-up with Calbay. And for the coming season, we expect to see, or we're hoping to see, an increase in demand for Australian citrus fruits, and that's sort of off the back of rising demand for foods with high vitamin C properties. And of course, you know, the rising interest in healthcare and healthier lifestyles was already underway before the pandemic. But we've certainly seen COVID push that along, and the same can be said for education and training and skills development. We're really excited to see some Australian universities looking to establish campuses in Indonesia, and that includes Monash and Central Queensland University, but we know there are others that are looking at establishing a presence here in the market as a way of creating opportunities for blended learning and keeping the pathway to the Australian education market open and strong. One important point that I think has already come up a number of times is that one of the unique features of IA-CEPA was around this economic powerhouse concept. And by that we mean IA-CEPA was designed to support the efforts of businesses on both sides to work together to jointly develop and supply a range of goods and services for export into third markets. And despite the impact of COVID, we've basically, our trade relationship is showing that Australia is already supplying inputs into Indonesia's industry. We're seeing that in iron ore, we're seeing that in Australian dairy, wheat and grains, which are all being sold as inputs into manufacturing processes here in Indonesia. And of course, live cattle is supporting Indonesia's cattle production and related sectors. One area where we think we can do more is around the growing advanced manufacturing sector. We know that Indonesia is interested in developing an electric vehicles industry sector, and we see one of the opportunities out of that is to build future partnerships between Australian and Indonesian industry in areas like electric vehicle charging technology and the provision of minerals for batteries. I was going to quickly touch on investment, but George, given the time, and I know you've got a number of other speakers, I'll probably finish by just saying, highlighting a couple of things that we're working on and that we hope to progress in the coming months to help focus on strengthening our business ties. One is around we will soon, in the coming second half of this year, launch a blueprint, and that's around deepening Australia's trade and investment links with Indonesia. The blueprint aims to build trade and investment and to help Australian investors and exporters to find opportunities. So we're looking forward to that. And of course, from Austrade's perspective, we are really looking forward to when borders open and being able to welcome Australian business delegations and to be able to facilitate visits to the market by Australian exporters and investors. So I think I'll leave it there, George, and pass back to you to invite others to speak. Thanks.
Thank you, Ibu Salidin, the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for Indonesia, for Austrade, for your insights. And now I'd like to invite Ms. Rebecca Hall, the Commissioner to Southeast Asia for the Victoria Government for Trade and Investment, who will also become one of our Board of Advisors in IABC. Thank you, Ibu Rebecca Hall, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
The Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm coming in via my phone, so I can't see you all on the screen, but hopefully you can see and hear me. Firstly, thank you to Pak Siswo and Pak Kiki for really in-depth and thoughtful presentation to kick off today's webinar. I want to acknowledge how pleased Victorian Government is to be ramping up our engagement with the IABC and the AIBC on both ends of the trade relationship. And although I can't say I'm coming to you from Jakarta, I remain absolutely committed from wherever I'm sitting and whatever screen I'm coming to support our work from Victorian Government and our team in Jakarta working with partners in Indonesia. I have so many comments to make, but I thought I'd try and focus just on 3 themes from what I heard from the presentations and also what we're working on with the Victorian Government. So I think the key theme for us a year on under IA-CEPA is how we are maintaining connection and how we are using this time, which is still a very uncertain time, still a challenging time for many people living through and dealing with the impacts of COVID, but how we as trade, investment and education professionals and government officials are maximising our opportunities to connect and to identify those business opportunities. It's been a key theme for us within the Victorian Government to focus on our virtual trade missions, our virtual business connections, and to really double down on our trade and investment agenda. And I think the other part of those connections is making sure that we are working smartly with the other players who are looking for similar benefits. So we really welcome the formation of Catalysts and how we're going to work in terms of IA-CEPA implementation, but also the role of the bilateral business chambers as well. For me personally, as a commissioner taking on this role during COVID, I haven't got to meet my team in person. I haven't got to meet many of our trade partners in person, but I am so impressed with actually what we've been able to achieve using virtual and digital connection, and I hope to be able to share some more of those outcomes shortly. Second theme, I guess, has come up in the conversations, who are the winners or where are the areas where we need to improve in terms of IA-CEPA outcomes. For us in Victoria and for our exporters and our sectors, we have seen really good success in horticulture, meat, dairy and grains, our major exporters, but also want to acknowledge the important role of our importers and partners in Indonesia around those that are benefiting from some of the tariff reductions. But I also want to call out, I think one of the speakers focused on the Green Deal and the green agenda and the opportunities for us to do much more work in the services space, whether that be around our professional services firms in water management, waste management, circular economy, whatever it may be. I think the services space is an area that we want to continue to support and bring the right Victorian capability to partner with government institutions and other businesses in Indonesia. I think a theme for us is very much around digital trade, not just e-commerce, but the digital trade agenda and how we can be positioning our Victorian expertise and partnering that with Indonesian expertise. I'll close then on, we've spoken a lot about the regional opportunity, ASEAN as a region, and I am fortunate to have a role with Victorian Government, which is a regional role covering Southeast Asia. So whilst we're focused on our bilateral opportunities, we are always looking for those broader opportunities where we can connect our partnerships across the key markets where we have offices in Vietnam, in Singapore, Malaysia, and of course Indonesia. But I wanted to talk, I guess, and close on our focus as a state government with other provincial governments in Indonesia. So whilst IA-CEPA hasn't changed this, for us, we have really focused and will continue to focus on our state-to-state and provincial partnerships with West Java. And we've continued to advance that work during COVID at a variety of levels, and also with Yogyakarta. I know, George, where you are based at the moment. So continuing to develop and deepen those provincial relationships and not just see them as a government-to-government partnership, but as an enabling arrangement to bring together other aspects of business, of industry, of education, to help us recover and sustain in a post-COVID world. I think I'll leave it there. I said 3 things, and I'd love to hear from the other panel members and perhaps take some questions as well. So back to you, Pak George.
Thank you, Ibu Rebecca. And mentioning regional governments, we also have here the Yogyakarta government with us today, Mr. Agus Priyono, who is also part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also from the Kulon Progo government of Central Java. So very good, beyond national, but even going in depth with regional. Thank you, Ibu Rebecca. And now, as we are, the flow is currently the state governments, I would like to invite the Trade and Investment Commissioner for Indonesia for Trade and Investment of the Queensland government, and also a member of our board at IABC, Mr. Ben Giles. Please, Pak Ben, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you, George. Terima kasih, and thank you to Dr. Kiki and Dr. Siswo on their presentations. They were very interesting. Yeah, as George mentioned, Ben Giles, I'm the commissioner here based in Jakarta. For Queensland, one thing that's really quite apparent, and it's been even more apparent in the last 18 months, is sort of who we're working with and what they need to do, what these companies need to do to get into Indonesia. A lot of what we talk about is very much macro, and that's great looking at all the figures, but the reality is that we work with small to medium enterprises. That some of them don't have a large business development budget. They can export, but they're probably looking to partner up here as well. It's a really interesting point to make, and I think we often look at that big picture and the big story, but the reality is and it's purely my perspective, we work with just those small companies. And keeping on that theme, I think one thing is for sure, and I think you'd all agree that yes, there are those true export areas, and I think Sally and Rebecca touched on that. Certainly for us with IA-CEPA, there's been a bit of an attraction, and certainly there have been other elements that might have forced some producers to sort of diversify and sort of spread their risk a little bit and look to Indonesia, and we've been able to get some success on some of the horticulture and of course beef and the like as well, which Queensland is very strong in. We're actually doing a promotion now on lemons, avocados and mandarins. That was a very quick plug. There are other areas, of course, where there are the true exports, but we all know that it's very much about that partnership. I think Indonesia would love to grow Hass avocados as well as Queensland one day, or as well as WA, and same with the Royal Honey Myrtle mandarins, but it's unlikely they will. So it's going to be a true export relationship. Most other relationships and these introductions that we make for our companies, it's very much about that partnership, whether there does need to be some investment here, or at least have a form of presence, and that's very much our role. So the big themes for us, outside that traditional export of the agri-business, which is incredibly important for Queensland, and on the mining side as well, there are probably 2 themes. I'd say there's one is security, and that would be then food security. So very much from our side, it is probably on the agri-tech. We've got a lot of great technologies that can come up here and really partner and help build the capacity here in Indonesia, and it plays right into that narrative. Also probably the energy security side as well. It's a traditional area for Queensland, but also possibly not just in that, the sort of the energy security and the coal and some of the technologies there to increase efficiencies, but also probably on new renewables as well. There'll be opportunity there. And then a little bit on the sort of that national security area as well, around the maritime and ports. But then another theme I'd say is resilience, and resilience. The head of that would probably be training and skills development, and that's a very important area for us as well to look at. It's a wide and complex area as well. I think every country in the world, they'd be lying if they said that they didn't have skills issues and shortages. And there are certainly those opportunities here that we're trying to match that up. For these businesses, they often need to probably come up and set up and find a relationship here and train in market, and that's And that's very much a shift that I find many SMEs having to grapple with, that it's, well, to do business here successfully, you really have to come up here and develop and work almost as a local with that international, the international edge. So yeah, that's certainly one. Sally touched on CQU, which it's great to have them up here. They're in a few areas actually. They've got a training centre here in Jakarta. They've got their full university is just coming through for Medan, and then they're doing an agricultural faculty as well in Manado, Samratulangi. And that's very much playing into that food security theme as well, where hopefully with that sort of a centre of excellence and Food Futures Institute, we can bring in some more Queensland expertise and capability to come in and help build the capacity and the industry here, while also getting some dollars back into the Queensland economy as well. So that's about all for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pak Ben. Very interesting. So a lot of interest in small and medium businesses doing business with Indonesia, investing in Indonesia from Queensland. Very, very, very interesting, Pak Ben. And now, so you've heard from the government sector, now from the private sector. And before we begin with private sector, I also want to acknowledge the presence of our past president, Pak Chris Sulisto, our board member, Pak Tim De La Hunti, Commonwealth Bank, and Pak John Ackerman. And also from Kadin, I noticed Pak Yon Bahar has joined us, and Pak Mutfi. So thank you all. And now from the private sector, distinguished business persons here will share their thoughts. Obviously, Pak Peter Fanning, a senior businessman, Australian businessman in Indonesia, and the Foreign Legal Counsel of Huta Barat Halim and Rekan, or HHR lawyers, and the chairman also of the International Business Council, whom is also on the board of IABC. Please, Pak Peter Fanning, would you share your thoughts now from the private sector? IA-CEPA in the midst of the global COVID pandemic. Pak Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. I'm actually gobsmacked. Dr. Kiki, I never got much beyond Economics 101 and struggled with statistics. So your presentation was fascinating, but I believe there's some great stuff in there, but I'd have to look more closely at it to find it. No, thank you very, very much for the work that's gone in there, and the lessons that work has for us. The IA-CEPA came along and I'm looking at IA-CEPA from the investment angle rather than the trade. IA-CEPA came along at an interesting time when, did one have an influence on the other? When Indonesia embarked on the implementation of the job creation law, which was an incredibly large enterprise to amend so many laws and replace so many regulations in order to enhance investment in Indonesia, not just by foreigners, of course, investment generally, but foreigners also. So the two have become are working in partnership, if you like. The attitude that IA-CEPA has generated of wanting to work together, and the opportunities provided by the amendments made to so many laws through the job creation law. While I'm on the job creation law, in my role as has been mentioned, the chairman of the International Business Chamber, international chambers were keen to look into the detail of the job creation law, and really I've found only two areas that I have a problem with and others have a problem with in the job creation law. All in all, it was a mighty effort with some very, very positive results. But the two areas that stand out are the fact that the proposed improvements in investment in education fell at the last hurdle, and the proposed amendments did not get through. So those wanting to invest in education really have to work hard around the edges within the framework of current regulation, which is not exactly helpful. The other area is the fact that, for reasons I won't go into, Indonesia insists now that foreign investors invest with at least 1 million, the equivalent of $1 million US. There's been mention many times several times of the role of small and medium, but Indonesia does not want investment from into small and medium. And I think that's a mistake, and it's a problem that we have to grapple with, a problem created before the job creation law, but exacerbated by the job creation law. But as I say, to end on that on a positive note, they're the only two aspects of that mighty 1,000-page effort that that was made. Before I came on into this session this morning, I spent an hour on the webinar with the Ridwan, the governor of West Java, and once again it came home to me the fact that the extent to which Australia manages to develop as low a profile as possible. There were a couple of 100 people on that webinar this morning where Governor Ridwan was addressing specifically the need for oxygen into West Java. In fact, I'm sitting here in West Java. I'm not in Java, not in Jakarta at all. I'm in West Java, in which he highlighted the needs that West Java, well, the role, of course, that West Java plays in the business scene, and that webinar was addressed actually to specifically to international companies doing business in West Java. And what was unfortunately very obvious was the lack of any Australians involved. So that didn't mean that Australians had to do anything except turn up to a webinar and show their face. And that unfortunately is evidenced again and again, the fact that Australia does manage to, in many ways, achieve a low profile. I'll mention that one of the issues that came from this morning's webinar was the hoary old issue of importing. The Koreans were very, very strong on the issue that they are doing their best to bring in oxygen cylinders and oxygen concentrators, and are up against the problems in importing medical devices, and the challenge was thrown to Governor Ridwan to solve that, or to try and solve that issue. So, but that speaks to the broader subject that IABC attempts to address, which is the blockages to trade and investment that come from other than pure tariffs, the need to continually improve on administration. But as I say, and I'll repeat, that has been done in a huge way through the job creation law, and the attitude, the attitude of cooperation that is in, and thanks to the Australian government for its huge efforts, the attitude that has been engendered by the successful completion of the IA-CEPA will help to take advantage of the significant improvements in administration brought about by the job creation law, bearing in mind that all is not fixed, but work in progress. Thanks, George.
Very good, very good. So quite a bit of optimism, yeah, on the achievement of the omnibus law. Thank you.
Oh yes, very much so.
Great. It's great. So it's created motivation and optimism. All right, very good. So now we move to the next panelists representing the private sector here. Pak Noke Kirian, obviously most of you know him. He's a very distinguished and well-known business personality in Indonesia. Pak Noke was the president of Rio Tinto here and also Lumon, and now runs Kirian and Partners, his consulting firm, public affairs firm. And so Pak Noke also was the past president of IABC. So I think a lot of you know him on this Zoom meeting. So Pak Noke, could you share maybe from the private sector area your thoughts? And I haven't noticed any declining enthusiasm due to COVID. So this is very interesting. Please, Pak, share your thoughts.
Thank you, Pak George. Well, let me first start with a reflection. I've been involved in the promotion of bilateral relations since 1998, when I first became a board member of IABC. And the problem, I think, has not changed. The lack of business between the two countries, because we've never changed from, say, about 10, 15 from both sides, and we're far behind trade relations between Australia and Vietnam and Thailand, two smaller economies than Indonesia. So that hasn't changed. And if I think back to the late 90s, early 2000s, the culprit at the time was the people-to-people relations, or the lack of it. Every IABC meeting or conference will talk to death, saying that we need to improve the people-to-people relations and business will follow. Well, I'm very happy to note that the people-to-people relations are now fixed. I don't think there's any issue at all. There are so many people-to-people contacts, even among young people. I've attended the conference of COSINDI, Conference of Australian and Indonesian Youth in Makassar a few years back. And I'm very impressed at how easy young and Indonesians and Australians mingle and talk freely. That was not the case when I was in university in the early 70s. So from that point of view, I think the situation has improved a lot, but business has not. And what we've been doing all the time, including this morning, with distinguished speakers like Pak Siswo and Pak Kiki, who have been dealing with this issue from a very scientific point of view, I think we are trying, well, also IABC. We've been leading the horse to water, but we can never make it drink. There's been 2 decades, and I think this is our job, all of us who are here and are interested in improving business in both sides. And I think Pak Kiki's presentation is very impressive. We've been thinking Indonesia always from the point of view of Australian investments into Indonesia. But from his presentation, I think that's very clear that there are also potential for Indonesian business to invest in Australia. Some are doing that already. but probably they're not listed as Indonesian investments because they're coming from another country in Asia. So it would be interesting to have a look at these aspects closer, and I'm at a loss to find a solution to, well, people-to-people relations is not a problem, as we said. So what is it? Ben Giles has talked about small and medium enterprises from Queensland, but the issue is the investment policies that does not promote investments from small and medium enterprises, from wherever they are. And big companies, big Australian companies, there are a lot, but we don't see them in Indonesia. So how can we make the horse drink? I think that's the issue that we need to solve. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Panoka. Very short, but very substance, yeah. And so obviously the panel representing the audience here from government side, private sector side, to respond on the presentation of Kiki. And I know we're coming on to the top of the hour, but I think all of you would allow me to probably give the last word to Dr. Siswo Pramono. And the reason is, obviously, if all, in due process goes well and according to plan, Siswo will have a major role in the bilateral relations in Indonesia and Australia. So, Siswo, in ending, could you respond to what the panel has just shared with us? And I think a lot of the I've noticed from the Australian government, Austrade, the Victorian government, the Queensland government, enthusiasm, a lot of enthusiasm. And then obviously from the private sector, Peter Fanning and Panoka shared about the outlook, from the private sector. So Siswo, maybe to end this panel today, maybe if you could share your last thoughts. And to everyone on this Zoom chat, I'd like to ask for you to stay, because we're going to have Arfat from the Secretariat, IABC Secretariat, will do a screenshot to commemorate this event today. So, Siswo, last thoughts from your thinking of all of what has been shared from Kiki to the distinguished panel that we had today. Please, Siswo. You're muted on, Pak. Perlu unmute, Pak.
Okay, thank you, Pak George. It's very interesting to see the panelists, and also I have taken note all of the suggestion and also thoughts that has been shared with us this morning. Now, improving the relation between Indonesia and Australia is a must, I think, because we are neighbors, and it's a waste of time if we cannot improve the bilateral ties between the two countries that is so complementary. And Pak Noka, I think it's correct that people-to-people relations is very important, and there has been some improvement now. In the past, there are a lot of young people in Indonesia, from Indonesia, study to Australia. We still have 18,000 students or so every given year in Australia. But it is also time, with the new Colombo plan, young Australia is pursuing more experience and study in ASEAN countries, including Indonesia, and that is very important. Living in the foreign countries, you will understand more. So it is now time for Australia to send more students, I think, and young people to travel to Asia, and particularly to Indonesia. I just, Pak George, if I may, and there is something that I would like to share in the screen with you. Is it possible to do the share screen?
Yes, please, yeah, go ahead.
The host need to disable. Yeah. Can you see this statistic? This is from the measuring Australian affection to Indonesia. We compiled the data from Louis thermometer. Louis is in Sydney. You can see that in the last 10 years, actually, affection to Indonesia is pretty low. Yeah, this is the annual pooling in Australia with the common people. Yeah, so we are still below China. Yeah, but China is dropping here because of the trade war in 2018. But most of the year we are far below China. Yeah, so there are two reasons. First, because Australian trade with China is so high, small and medium enterprise, they tied up with the market in China. So at least the affection with China is much stronger than the affection to Indonesia. This is what the statistics told us. So if we improve the medium and small medium enterprise between the two countries, I believe the affection will also increase following that. Aside from the increasing number of young Australia to visit Asia or to study in Asia or in Indonesia. I think that's one thing. So, and we have also the potential. We have like 87,000 of Indonesian diaspora in Australia, and many of them is with the Australian Business Council as well. So they have company, so they know the Australian culture. Yesterday, I talked with Phil Turtle on how about the food culture in Australia, because from Kiki, we understand that one of the strongest point is on the food and beverage. So food culture in Australia, we can also understand if we working together with our diaspora in Australia, because they have been the second generation of Indonesia and Australia. They understand the Australian culture, the food culture, and so on. If we would like to improve the exportation or perhaps the importation also of food and beverage, and we understand food culture, we need to understand food culture. So this is one thing that we would like to share as well. Now, last but not least, Pak George, you mentioned to me several times that Australian market, even though Australia is a very advanced country, but market also limited due to the population is not really very big. Yeah, but we have advantage to have more flow of science and technology, for instance, education from Australia. But to the market per se, I found there is possibility to use Australia and with working with diaspora, Indonesia and Australia, as a stepping stone toward the Pacific, because the Pacific we have 10 million people more. So combined with Australian market will be 35 million people. And what I found in here is very interesting. There's the pattern of trade between Indonesia and Australia and Indonesia and the Pacific Island countries. So this is our export to Australia. And you can see the color. What we export to Australia, we also export in Fiji, for instance, like the green color is agriculture product. We export agriculture product to Australia, also to Fiji. And this is for like the light green is like raw tobacco. We export it to Australia, but we also export it to Fiji as well as to Solomon Island, for instance. Now, yesterday we discussed on the possibility of using Australian harbor like Fremantle. Fremantle is a main harbor of things, agriculture or food product from Indonesia via Singapore into Australia. And then the possibility from Australia into the Pacific as well. So this kind of win-win situation. Yeah, and judging from the research done by LPEM UI, Pak Vikis and others on the trade complementary index, and we see that most of trade complementary index from Indonesia into the Australia and the Pacific Island is great. It's big, yeah, but not the vice versa. Yeah, the vice versa is a bit low. So my point is that this is also a time working together for the third market, as I mentioned before, the impact of the Indonesian, Australian CEPA to the Pacific as well, because we see the complementarity of the pattern of trade between Indonesia and Australia and Indonesia and the Pacific. So I think I have a lot of expectation and also a positive tone to see how the relation between Australia and Indonesia is going to move forward. And I believe that working together, we can accomplish that. Thank you, Pak George.
Thank you for the last remarks, Dr. Siswo Pramono, the head of policy and planning.